Good evening, folks, and welcome to the Horror Corner. I'm your host, Sean Patrick Erschen, and this week we are ranking the classic vampires in film. And this is going to be my first tier ranking video. Now, I'm not technical savvy at all. I'm going to do the best I can. I've kind of figured this out a little bit, but not completely. So I'm just gonna give it the old college try and see how it goes. So I have here a pretty wide array of, I think, classic vampires in film. And so the tiers are Vampire God is like the ultimate, iconic portrayal of a vampire. Fantastic is like really, really good portrayals, but not, historical or iconic. And then Bloody Good are just real solid portrayals. And then you got Veggie Vamp, which is very light in tone and not that great. And then Bloodless was just crap, the bottom of the barrel. uh, so let's give this a try, and we're going to start with Mr. Bela Lugosi. From the Universal Dracula film from 1931. Yes, pretty much the one that started it all. I mean, is that even a question? Obviously, he's in vampire god status. Um, to me, he's the definitive portrayal of Count Dracula for all time. As much as I love Christopher Lee, and Christopher Lee is my favorite portrayal of Dracula, but I feel like Bela Lugosi is the most important. He's the one that set the standard for all to follow, and he's just the definitive and iconic portrayal of Dracula throughout time. He's the most well-known, the most copied, the most studied portrayal of Dracula on film. So yes, he's easily Vampire God. That's a no-brainer. All right, next up we got an interesting one here. The Countess Maria Zaleska in a very underrated film in the Universal canon. That's Dracula's daughter. Yeah, you don't hear that one too often. I'm going to put her in Fantastic because I absolutely love this movie and I think more people need to talk about it. And I absolutely love Gloria Holden's portrayal of the character of Dracula's daughter. I think it's an excellent sequel, one of the best and most underrated horror sequels of all time. And I think she's such a great character, the Countess Maria Zaleska. We even had the first kind of hint at a little bit of lesbian undertones there in one of the scenes. So yeah, I think it's an important film that people don't talk about, and I love it. And to me, it is fantastic. Next up, we have a very, very popular portrayal of Count Dracula himself, and that is Gary Oldman in the role in Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula from 1992. Yeah, a lot of people love this. A lot of people feel it's the best portrayal of Dracula. I think it is a great portrayal of Dracula. I do have a few issues with the film. I think it's a little bit too Hollywood glamour, but uh, no doubt it's a great film, and Gary Oldman is excellent in the role. He brings his own flavor mixed with a little bit of Bela Lugosi, for sure. He does have kind of that Hungarian accent that Bella had, for sure. So I'm going to put him in. Is he Vampire God or is he Fantastic? Ugh, that's tough. Yeah, I'll have to put him in Vampire God because I mean he's so well known. Yeah, so many people love this portrayal. So many people feel it's the best. I mean, so many people love the 1992 version of Dracula. So yeah, gonna have to put him in Vampire God a little bit reluctantly, but I gotta admit, I gotta give him credit. So next up we have the lovely, the beautiful Ingrid Pitts in the role of Carmilla slash Mercala slash Marcella in the Vampire Lovers. To me, I don't care. I'm putting her in Vampire God. Yes, a female vampire in the role of Vampire God. Absolutely love this woman in the role. To me, she is like the female Dracula in so many ways. She's got a similar kind of deep accent and a deep voice. Very seductive, very erotic. Great film, all kinds of lesbian overtones and um, yeah. I think it's the quintessential lesbian vampire film, The Vampire Lovers, which is part of the Karnstein trilogy from Hammer Films. So if you haven't seen those films, absolutely highly recommend them, especially The Vampire Lovers. And Ingrid Pitt is an absolute icon of Hammer, even though she was only in two films. It's like hard to believe. So not doing so bad so far. We got 3 already in the vampire god status. Wow. What's next? All right. So, all right. Oh, I lost it. See, screwed it up already. I had it shared. All right. Let me try and get it back. Sorry. All right. All right. Maybe get back to that. Okay. All right. How we doing now? Am I back here? All right. Here we go. Let's continue, shall we? Sorry about that. See, this is me just being a beginner with this. I might fumble a little as we go, but I'm having fun. All right, so next up, I mean, this is a no-brainer. We have Christopher Lee as the Count Dracula from Hammer Films, and I did a couple outside of Hammer as well. Dracula from Jess Franco, kind of a Euro horror version of Dracula from 1970. He also did Dracula and Son, which is outside of Hammer. But he did 7 films in the Hammer Dracula franchise. And to me, it's an absolute no brainer. He's going vampire god. It's no question about it. He is my personal favorite portrayal of Dracula. I think he's more menacing than Bela Lugosi was. He's got that suave charm about him, and also he's very feral as well. Once he's in Dracula mode, when he's in monster mode, he's very intimidating. He's a very tall guy, Christopher Lee, so he brings that intimidation factor. And what a brilliant performance in every single Hammer Dracula film. And he's still good even in the ones outside of Hammer, but those films themselves aren't particularly great. But he is always great. Christopher Lee is a brilliant actor, and he is iconic in the role of Dracula. No question about it. Vampire god all day and night. Well, we got 4 vampire gods already. Well, how about that? All right, next up, we're gonna get a little more modern and getting into the superhero genre with Blade, the Vampire Hunter from Marvel Comics. The film that really kicked things off for Marvel films. Absolutely. Before that, you had like kind of campy, cheesy films. This is the first like official big budget blockbuster Marvel film, really. And it's interesting that they took kind of an obscure character in Bleed, but he's played so well by Wesley Snipes. Such a great character. He's half vampire hunter, so it's very interesting. And he just kicks all kinds of ass. He's a martial arts master. He's a He's a badass vampire killer. At the same time, he is part vampire, so that's very interesting. I am putting Blade in fantastic. I don't think he's quite on the level as Vampire God, but he's definitely in fantastic. Wesley Snipes does a fantastic job. I believe he's a third degree black belt himself, so he makes it look like he knows what he's doing. Excellent movie. Still to this day, it holds up. This is the film that just kickstarted Marvel in film. All right, guys. Next up, what do we got here? This one's going to be interesting. You guys are probably like, "Why do you have so many different versions of Dracula?" Oh man, I did it again. What am I doing? Stop that. Yeah, so I have several versions of Dracula, and the next one is an interesting one. It's from the 1979 version of Dracula, starring Frank Langella in the role of the Count. Um, Gotta say, he's extremely charismatic, probably the most charismatic version of Dracula, and that most handsome version of Dracula. This is Dracula for the ladies, I think. Um, and that's where Frank Langella exceeds. He's extremely charming and suave and debonair. He's almost like the James Bond of Dracula. I mean, um, the movie itself hasn't quite stood the test of time. You really don't hear much about it. I remember when I was a kid, it was pretty popular. It was one of the defining versions of Dracula at that time, but now you barely hear a word about it. So I can't really put it in Vampire God. Can I put it in Fantastic? Oh man, it is memorable, but I don't know if I could put it in Fantastic. I think he does a great job in the role, but it's almost like a forgotten film. I'm gonna put him in Bloody Good, reluctantly, because I think it should be in Fantastic, but has it really stood the test of time? People really never talk about it. Um, yeah. So Frank Langella's Dracula from 1979 goes in Bloody Good, because it is bloody good. Another version of Dracula here. This is the one from the Monster Squad. Such a fun film. It's almost like a kids horror film in a way. Uh, but yeah, they got all the classic monsters in the film. You got the Wolfman, you got the Frankenstein's monster, and you got Dracula. And this is a pretty faithful version of Dracula. Definitely, as I said with Bela Lugosi, see how he defined what Dracula is, what we see Dracula as. Now, this is a great example of one who followed very much in the footsteps of Bela Lugosi. I mean, to a T. But where does he belong in the tier ranking? I'm gonna have to say bloody good. Because he is a little bit generic in a way, even though he has the classic look down, and it is a fairly solid performance. I don't think he's particularly memorable in the role. When you think of the top Draculas of all time, he's not likely to come up in the conversation until much later. But I think it's a solid version of Dracula, very paying a lot of homage to Bela Lugosi in the role. So I'm going to put him in Bloody Good. All right, guys, what do you think so far? Interesting list, isn't it? We haven't had anybody get to Veggie Vamp yet, but next up we have Edward from Twilight. I know everybody loves Twilight out there, right? It's everybody's favorite vampire film. Um, Damn. I don't hate Twilight as much as so many people do, and I might lose a little bit of credibility for that. But I think I think that Robert Pattinson is a really good actor, and I think he did well in the role. I don't think the film's a particularly great, but I don't think you can really deny he's pretty good in the role. He's very hypnotic, very suave, debonair, handsome, charming. Everything about him is meant to draw you in, like he says in the film. Uh, so I know everyone wants me to put him in Veggie Vamp or Bloodless, but it's tough. Um, damn, I might have to listen to the people a little bit on this one because I do like being here on YouTube. I don't want to get kicked off, so I'm gonna put Team Edward, in Veggie Vamp. I think he's pretty good in the role, but yeah, Twilight as a franchise is a little bit rough. It's definitely the teeny bopper version of vampire history. So we do have our first Veggie Vamp in Edward from Twilight. Next one's going to be really interesting. Uh, it's a fantastic film, um, and that is Let the Right One In. And we're talking about Ellie from Let the Right One In. And that is the original Swedish version, not the Hammer version of Let Me In from 2010. Or the new series that's out, the television series based on Let the Right One In, which is also very good. All of them are very good. But gotta go with the original Ellie when it comes to portraying that character in such a fantastic story. It's something so different. You get kind of this little, not, I don't want to say love affair, but kind of a love story between two children. Or is she a child? Or is she a girl? She's kind of a monster. She's not a person, but she's been around for a long time. She hasn't been a girl in a long time. We don't know how old she is, really. She could be hundreds of years old because she's a vampire. But where do we want to put Ellie from Let the Right One In on our tier list? I'm going to. She's definitely not quite Vampire God. She's not that well known, only by the hardcore horror fans, I would say. Even though she's absolutely fantastic and a great character. Man, it's tough. I mean, I think it's a vampire classic as far as the film goes. I think it's a very, very, very interesting character. Not quite on the vampire god level, but I think she's better than Bloody Good. So I'm going to put her in Fantastic. Ellie from Let the Right One In makes it all the way up to Fantastic. That is pretty good, huh? Next up is a really, really cool one. One of my favorites. My favorite 80s vampire film, and that is Fright Night. Good evening and welcome to Fright Night. For real. Yes, I'm talking about Jerry Dandridge, as played so brilliantly by Chris Sarandon in Fright Night from 1985. Such a fun film, such an excellent vampire film with outstanding practical effects and outstanding performance by Chris Sarandon. I consider Chris Sarandon's portrayal of Jerry Dandridge as the most charismatic vampire of all time. That's why I'm gonna put him in Vampire God, baby. Yes, Jerry Dandridge goes to Vampire God on the tier list ranking of classic vampires. I don't care what anybody says. Um, he's even more charismatic and charming than Dracula himself, I would say. And that's tough to do. So for that reason alone, he goes up in Vampire God. But such a memorable performance in a fantastic film. Next one is going to be very interesting. We got Lestat from Interview with the Vampire from 1994, was it? Um, yeah, Anne Rice's first novel brought to film. Um, and as you all know in history, Anne Rice did not particularly care for the idea of Tom Cruise portraying Lestat the vampire. But when she saw the film, she was blown away. She was like, "Oh yeah, absolutely, he nails it." And there's no question about it that Tom Cruise is absolutely fantastic, pun intended, in the role of the vampire Lestat. An excellent film, probably the most epic vampire film of all time. Beautifully filmed, beautifully directed, and beautifully acted by the entire cast, especially Tom Cruise in the role of Lestat. He's charming, debonair, handsome, and very, very evil. It almost gives Dracula a run for the money. But I have to put him in Fantastic. I can't put him in Vampire God because he's technically not really the star of the film. The star is really Brad Pitt as Lewis, but he is certainly the standout vampire of that film. So for that reasons, and for Tom Cruise's very committed performance, I am going to put him in Fantastic. Next up is probably the majority of people who grew up at this time, their favorite 80s vampire movie. And we're talking about The Lost Boys, which I was very late to the party on. I didn't see it until a few years ago. I just never got around to seeing it for some reason. I don't know why. But once I did, I realized what all the fuss about. It is a great vampire film. Not my favorite. My favorite is Fright Night from 1985, but certainly the second best 80s vampire film. And with that being said, we have Kiefer Sutherland in the role of David. Now, where do we stand with David? Definitely a great portrayal, a great performance, and a very cool look for a vampire. He's definitely got that 80s look with the hairdo, the spiked blonde hair and the menacing performance by Kiefer Sutherland. But would I put him in Vampire God? I'm not so sure because he's not as well known as some of the others. Even though the film itself probably is iconic, I don't think this particular character necessarily is. So I'm going to put David from The Lost Boys in Bloody Good. I think it's a great portrayal, but I don't think he's like iconic, and I don't think he's as well known as uh, anyone in the Vampire God section. And I don't think his performance is fantastic, really. I think it's just very good. Great performance by Kiefer Sutherland, but not particularly memorable. Not as much as Vampire God or Fantastic, anyway. Definitely bloody good, though. I think that's accurate. Next one, I'm curious to see what you guys think out there. We have the second installment of the Karnstein trilogy from Hammer based on the Carmilla novels. This time, Carmilla slash Mercalla is played by Jutta Stensgaard. Um, Definitely a much different portrayal of the character, not nearly as menacing as Ingrid Pitt in The Vampire Lovers. Um, Probably equally as beautiful as Ingrid Pitt was, but I don't know. She's not that charming or that charismatic. She's just like a solid portrayal of the character, but and she's certainly easy on the eyes, but I wouldn't say she's in the Fantastic League or certainly not Vampire God, but and Lust for a Vampire is easily the weakest film in the Karnstein trilogy. So I'm gonna have to say, although I do like Ita Sensgard, I thought she was solid. I do think she gets a lot of unfair crap because of the quality of the film, but she's nowhere near on the level of an Ingrid Pitt or even their third film. So I'm gonna put her in Veggie Vamp. So Ita Stensgaard from Lust for a Vampire goes in Veggie Vamp, guys. What do you think? So that's the list so far. We're getting down in the nitty gritty. We only have four left. Who do we have next? Definitely an interesting one here. We got Mr. Barlow, Mr. Kurt Barlow from the Salem's Lot miniseries, directed by Toby Hooper from back in the 80s. Uh, Wait, is it 80s or was it 70s? Actually, it was 70s, wasn't it? Yeah, certainly a huge homage to the original Nosferatu film from the 1920s. Certainly, that look of Mr. Barlow is heavily inspired by Nosferatu. But man, is he menacing? I mean, terrifying. Maybe the scariest vampire in history, film history. In what I think is the scariest television horror film ever made in Salem's Lot. It's a great film, and the makeup is fantastic. Um, yeah, a great character, played so well and so scary. It's tough, but I mean, when it comes down to his look, it's almost too reliant on Nosferatu. So I'm gonna put Mr. Barlow in fantastic. I do think he's better than Bloody Good, but just because he's so scary and menacing and evil. Face the monster. His faith versus your faith. Awesome movie. Yeah. All right, next up we have Nosferatu himself from the 1920s. Really, it's the first incarnation of the Dracula story, even though they didn't get the rights to officially call it Dracula, unfortunately. It's obviously the Dracula story when you watch the film. There's no question about it. It's based on the Bram Stoker novel, 100%. But yeah, what a creepy film. And it is a silent film. We are in the silent era of film. But man, this film stands the test of time. It's still so creepy. And so well directed by F.W. Murnau and played so well by Max Schrenk. Such a creepy portrayal. One of the scariest vampires of all time. Yeah, and it's probably the creepiest black and white horror film of all time. Nosferatu is the original monster. So it's 100 years old, guys. This film is 100 years old, and it still stands the test of time. So I'm putting Nosferatu in Vampire God, baby. You don't like it? Tough. Because Nosferatu goes in Vampire God. Absolutely iconic portrayal. Absolutely terrifying, creepy as hell, menacing, and yeah, absolutely love Nosferatu. He's going in Vampire God. Next up, we have kind of an indie vampire film with one of my favorite horror actresses of all time, Barbara Crampton, in the role of Jacob's wife. Really cool film. I feel like more people need to check this one out. More people need to see Jacob's wife. And I do think her portrayal is mesmerizing. I mean, Barbara Crampton is just mesmerizing, period, no matter what she does. But as a vampire, she just kills it. Uh, I do wish she kind of went full blown evil in the film, which she doesn't quite reach. But extremely charismatic nonetheless. I'm going to put Barbara Crampton's portrayal of Jacob's wife in Bloody Good. Not quite on the level of Fantastic, only because Jacob's wife is kind of not really talked about. It's very seldom seen or talked about, but I highly recommend it. And Barbara Crampton does deserve to be on the Bloody Good tier for sure. Next up, we have the Twins of Evil from the Karnstein trilogy, the final entry in the Karnstein trilogy from Hammer Films based on the Carmilla novels. And I say Twins of Evil because it's the name of the film, but the Collinson twins were not both evil in the film. Only one of the girls was. Only one of the girls became a full blown vampire, and that is, uh, yeah, the other girl was good and trying to get her sister to come back, and she was very reluctant to get involved, even though she was kind of verbally abused by Peter Cushing's character. She still stayed true to her good side. She did not cross over to the dark side with her sister. The Collinson twins, as you know, were Playboy models, Playboy playmates of the year. Um, and I think they did such a great job, even though they had little experience in acting, they still did a great job in the roles. And Twins of Evil is a huge step up from Lust for a Vampire in the trilogy, without a doubt. Great film. Um, might even be the most popular in the series, I would say. A lot of people love Twins of Evil. Uh, uh, but I don't think they're quite on the fantastic level. They have great performances, but not on a level of fantastic. Certainly not Vampire God. I'm going to put the Collinson twins, the Twins of Evil, in Bloody Good. And that's it, folks. That's it for my ranking of the classic vampires in film, my first tier list video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And thank you for joining me, Sean Patrick Erschen, in the Horror Corner. Tune in and stay scared. Peace out, guys. Have a great one.